I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Sitting in the dimly lit living room of the house we built together, my mind raced as I waited for her to come home. The silence in the house was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards under my restless pacing. My heart felt heavy, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. A few weeks ago, I noticed little changes. She started coming home later than usual, brushing it off with excuses about work. Her phone, which she used to leave lying around, now rarely left her side. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. But deep down, a gnawing suspicion grew. The turning point came when I found a receipt tucked into her coat pocket. It wasn't the receipt itself that bothered me. It was for a fancy dinner at a restaurant we'd never been to together. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I stared at it, replaying every excuse she'd given me about late nights and overtime. My gut told me there was more to the story, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Days turned into weeks, and the signs became impossible to ignore. A faint whiff of cologne I didn't recognize lingered on her clothes. Her laughter, once so genuine and shared between us, now seemed reserved for someone else during her hushed phone calls. I knew I couldn't keep brushing it under the rug. I needed answers. One evening, when she said she'd be working late again, I decided to follow her. My heart pounded as I sat in my car a few blocks away from the address she'd given me. Instead of her office, she walked into an upscale restaurant, arm in arm with a man I didn't recognize. My chest tightened as I watched them laughing and leaning into each other like I didn't exist. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, humiliation. But most of all, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. She had chosen to betray me, and I needed to confront her. When she finally walked through the door that night, I was waiting for her. She looked surprised to see me sitting there. The lights dimmed, her usual greeting met with silence. I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. Instead, I saw a stranger. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but laced with an edge that caught her off guard. She paused, her hand still clutching her purse, and gave me a cautious look. "About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. Her tone only fueled the fire inside me. I stood up, holding the receipt in one hand and a photo I had taken of her with the other man in the other. "About this." Her face turned pale as her eyes darted between the evidence in my hands. For a moment, she seemed to struggle for words, her mouth opening and closing like she was gasping for air. I can explain," she stammered, but I wasn't in the mood for her lies. "You have 15 minutes, I said coldly. 15 minutes to pack your things and leave this house for good." Her eyes widened in shock. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice firm. "You made your choices. Now it's time to live with them." She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind, to show some sign of weakness. But I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was breaking, but I refused to let her see it. She finally turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. As I listened to the sound of her hurriedly throwing clothes into a bag, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. This was the end of something I once cherished, but it was also the beginning of something new, something I hadn't yet defined but knew I needed. When she came back downstairs, her suitcase in hand, she looked at me one last time. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "No," I replied, meeting her gaze. "The only thing I regret is trusting you." And with that, she walked out the door, leaving behind the life we'd built together. As the sound of her car faded into the night, I sat back down on the couch, the weight of the moment sinking in. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. The silence after she left was deafening. The sound of the front door slamming echoed in my mind long after it happened, as if sealing the end of a chapter one never wanted to write. I sat there, staring at the empty room, the life we had built together now reduced to nothing but a series of painful memories. I couldn't bring myself to move. The weight of everything I had just done hung heavy on my shoulders. For years, I had poured my heart and soul into our relationship, believing we were building something real, something unshakable. And in just a matter of moments, it all crumbled. The evidence was still on the table. The receipt, the photo of her with the man whose name I didn't even care to know. I stared at it, a burning sensation building in my chest. How long had she been living this double life? How many nights had she looked me in the eye and lied with such ease? But then, a new thought crept in, one that both terrified and liberated me. She was gone now. The house was mine again, but it felt so empty. I stood up, pacing the living room, trying to figure out what to do next. The first step was removing every trace of her. I grabbed a box from the garage and started packing her things. Every item of hers felt like a betrayal: a scarf she'd worn on our weekend trips, a pair of earrings I'd bought her for her birthday, a framed photo of us on vacation. Each piece told a story, but now those stories felt like lies. I tossed them into the box with more force than necessary, as if I could erase the memories by getting rid of the objects. When I got to our bedroom, I froze. The bed we'd shared for so many years suddenly felt tainted. I couldn't bear to sleep in it, not after knowing what she'd done. I stripped the sheets, bundled them into a trash bag, and threw them outside. I'd buy new ones tomorrow. Maybe I'd even get a new bed. Anything to reclaim my space, my life. But it wasn't just the physical reminders that hurt, it was the emotional ones. Every corner of the house held a memory, a moment when I thought we were happy. The kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals, laughing and talking about our day. The couch where we'd curled up to watch movies. The garden where we'd planted flowers together. All of it felt like a cruel joke now. As I sat on the edge of the now-bare mattress, I realized I didn't even know who I was without her. So much of my identity had been wrapped up in being her husband, in building a life together. And now that life was gone. I felt hollow, like a shell of the person I used to be. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but that only made things worse. Social media was a minefield of happy couples and curated perfection. It felt like everyone else had their lives together, while mine was falling apart. I tossed the phone aside, frustrated. The hours dragged on, and the weight of it all became unbearable. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing the only person I could think of, my best friend, Eric. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, man," he said, his voice instantly laced with concern. "What's going on?" I kicked her out," I said, my voice shaking. There was a long pause on the other end. "You did the right thing," he finally said. "You deserve better than someone who would do that to you." His words should have been comforting, but they only made me feel the loss even more. "I just don't know what to do now," I admitted. "Everything feels broken." "You'll figure it out," he said. "But you don't have to do it alone. Come over tomorrow. We'll talk, maybe grab a drink." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, thanks, Eric." After we hung up, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this, even if it felt that way right now. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Her betrayal had set something in motion, and I wasn't sure what the end of it would look like. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of emotions: grief, anger, and a hint of determination. I knew I couldn't sit around wallowing forever. I needed to take control of my life again, to figure out who I was without her. And that started with facing the truth, no matter how painful it was. What I didn't know then was that her betrayal wasn't the end of the story. It was just the start of a journey I never saw coming. A journey that would test me in ways I never imagined. The morning light filtered through the bare window, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, staring blankly at the surface. My mind replayed everything from the night before. Her face when she saw the evidence, her hasty packing, her bitter words as she walked out the door. It felt like a bad dream, but the hollow silence in the house was proof that it wasn't. I needed to do something, anything, to pull myself out of this state. The thought of her betrayal made my stomach churn, but there was something deeper gnawing at me, something I couldn't quite place. A question that kept circling in my mind. How long had this been going on? I decided to find out. With a new sense of purpose, I grabbed her phone charger from the drawer where she always kept it. She'd been glued to her phone these past few months, and I was certain it held answers. I didn't have her phone, of course, but I had an idea. She'd been logged into the family laptop, often checking emails or doing work at the kitchen counter. My fingers trembled as I opened the laptop and clicked on the browser. The first thing I saw was her email account still logged in. I hesitated. Part of me felt guilty for invading her privacy, but then I reminded myself, she destroyed that boundary the moment she chose to betray me. With a deep breath, I clicked on her inbox. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of emails between her and a man named Travis. At first, they seemed innocent, discussions about work, sharing jokes, but as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. There were dinner plans, casual mentions of our spot, and even one message where she thanked him for the unforgettable night. My jaw clenched as I read his reply. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. Travis. The name was unfamiliar, but his presence in her life was painfully clear. And now I had confirmation. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was an ongoing affair, woven into the fabric of her life while she pretended everything was fine between us. I paced the room, my emotions swinging wildly between anger and despair. How could she do this to me? To us? I thought about all the times she looked me in the eyes and lied. Every "I love you," every kiss goodnight, every moment I thought was real. The weight of it all was suffocating. But then, as the initial shock began to subside, another thought surfaced. Who else knows? Was this just between the two of them, or had others been aware of her betrayal? The idea that people I trusted could have been complicit in this was almost too much to bear. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over Eric's name. He'd been my best friend for years, my rock through every major life event. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. "Hey, Eric," I said when he picked up. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course," he said immediately. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. "It's about Sheila," I finally said. "I found evidence. She's been seeing someone else." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Man, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "That's awful." "Yeah," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "But there's something else. The guy's name is Travis. Do you know him?" Eric's silence was deafening. My heart sank as I waited for his response, a sick feeling spreading through my chest. "I've heard the name," he said carefully. "He works in her office, doesn't he?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah. Apparently, he's been working with her closely." Eric sighed. "Listen, I don't know the guy personally, but I've heard things. He's got a bit of a reputation, if you know what I mean." The pieces began to fall into place. Travis wasn't just some random coworker. He was a man who made a habit of getting involved with married women. My anger flared again, this time directed not just at Sheila but at this stranger who had wormed his way into our lives. "Thanks, Eric," I said, my voice tight. "I appreciate it." "Anytime," he said. "And hey, don't let this break you. You're stronger than this, man." After we hung up, I sat in silence, processing everything. The betrayal felt even deeper now, knowing she'd thrown away our life for someone like Travis. But I wasn't going to let this destroy me. If anything, it fueled my determination to move forward, to rebuild my life on my terms. I knew there was still more to uncover, more questions to answer. But for now, I needed to take it one step at a time. And the first step was figuring out how to let go of the past while holding on to the lessons it had taught me. Little did I know, the story was far from over. The following days felt like walking through a fog. The pain was still fresh, the betrayal raw, but I couldn't sit still. I had to keep digging, peeling back the layers of lies Sheila had wrapped herself in. If she thought she could walk away unscathed, she was wrong. I spent hours combing through every shred of evidence I had. Her emails with Travis were only the tip of the iceberg. I found hotel bookings, dates that matched the nights she'd claimed to be working late. There were receipts for expensive dinners at places she'd never mentioned. Even a florist invoice for a bouquet with a note reading, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love, T." It felt like I was living in a nightmare, each new discovery cutting deeper than the last. But the most crushing blow came when I found a charge for a weekend getaway at a luxury resort. It was dated just 2 months ago, during a time when I thought we'd been working on us. I remembered that weekend vividly. Sheila had told me she was going on a business retreat. She'd even kissed me goodbye, promising to call when she had a free moment. She never did. As I stared at the resort's name on the statement, my chest tightened. I had to know the truth. I picked up the phone and called the resort, my heart pounding as I waited for someone to answer. "Good afternoon, Sunset Ridge Resort." A cheerful voice greeted me. "How can I assist you?" I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hi, I'm calling to confirm a booking from 2 months ago. The name would be Sheila Parker." "One moment, please," the receptionist replied. I could hear the clicking of keys in the background. "Yes, I see a reservation for Sheila Parker." It was a 2-night stay in one of our luxury suites. I swallowed hard. Was there another name on the booking? "Yes," she said, her tone still polite. "It was listed under Travis Miller as well." That was all I needed to hear. My grip tightened around the phone as I fought to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for confirming." After hanging up, I felt a wave of anger and humiliation wash over me. She hadn't even tried to hide it. They'd been parading their affair in plain sight, booking romantic getaways and living out their fantasy while I was at home, oblivious. I clenched my fists, the betrayal hitting me all over again. But it wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the audacity, the blatant disregard for our marriage, for everything we'd built together. I couldn't sit by and let this slide. I needed to confront her, to make her face the mess she'd made. That evening, I decided to call her. Not because I wanted her back, but because I needed answers. When she picked up, her voice was calm, almost casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hello," she said. "It's me," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "We need to talk." There was a pause on her end, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "What about?" "You know what about, Sheila. Don't play dumb." She sighed, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But instead, she said, "Fine. What do you want to know?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been seeing him?" There was another pause, longer this time. "A few months," she admitted finally. "It just happened." "It didn't just happen, Sheila," I snapped. "You made a choice. Over and over again. And while you were out there with him, I was here, holding everything together, thinking we were okay." Her tone shifted, defensive now. "Don't make this all about me. You're not perfect either, you know?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? For your affair?" "I'm just saying," she said, her voice rising. "Things weren't exactly great between us. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I gave you everything, Sheila. Everything. And this is how you repay me?" She didn't respond. The silence on the other end was deafening, but I could feel her unease. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for it to get this far." "But it did," I said bitterly. "And now you have to live with the consequences." I ended the call before she could say anything else. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her half-hearted apologies. She had made her bed, and now she could lie in it, alone. As I sat in the quiet of the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken control of the situation. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I was done playing the victim. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let her or Travis take any more from me. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. There were still loose ends to tie up, still questions that needed answers. And as much as I wanted to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. More lies, more betrayal, waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected call. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but something told me to answer it. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Is this Mr. Parker?" A man's voice asked, formal and steady. "Yes, who's asking?" "This is James, the HR manager at Sheila's company. I wanted to reach out regarding some concerns." My stomach tightened. "Concerns about what?" There was a brief pause before he continued. Sheila's conduct at work. I think you might want to know that her relationship with a colleague has raised some issues here. It's been affecting the team dynamic. I clenched my jaw. Even her workplace wasn't spared from her recklessness. Why are you telling me this? I asked, unsure of where this was heading. James sighed. Because it's possible this situation could escalate. I wanted to give you a heads up. I thanked him, though my mind was racing. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore. Her actions had consequences far beyond our home. As I hung up, I realized something important. Sheila's lies weren't just unraveling. They were imploding. And this was only the beginning. Later that afternoon, as I tried to focus on anything but Sheila, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "You don't know me, but I know Sheila, and I think you deserve to know the truth. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main at 5 p.m. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Who was this? Another piece of the puzzle, or some cruel joke? I hesitated, but curiosity won. I replied, "I'll be there." At 5 p.m. sharp, I walked into the small coffee shop. A woman in her late 30s waved me over. Her expression was apologetic, but determined. "You're Sheila's husband, right?" she asked as I sat down. "Yes. And you are?" "My name's Rachel. I work with Sheila and Travis," she said, her voice lowering. "I've seen things, heard things, that I thought you should know." I leaned forward. "Go on." Rachel hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She played a recording, a snippet of a conversation between Sheila and Travis. My stomach dropped as Sheila's voice came through, laughing as she said, "He's so clueless. He actually believes I've been working late." Rachel stopped the recording and looked at me, her eyes full of sympathy. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. You deserve better." I thanked her, though my mind was spinning. Each revelation cut deeper than the last. Sheila's betrayal wasn't just a private wound. It was a public mockery. And now, I couldn't unhear her callous words. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, Rachel's recording playing over and over in my mind. The laughter in Sheila's voice wasn't just cruel. It was deliberate, like she enjoyed deceiving me. My hands trembled as I replayed her words one last time before shutting off my phone. The house felt colder than ever. Every corner seemed to echo with memories of our life together, now tainted by lies. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been made a fool, not just by Sheila, but by everyone who had witnessed her betrayal and said nothing. I decided to confront her with everything I had, the emails, the receipts, and now Rachel's recording. She needed to see the mess she'd created, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I wanted answers, closure, something to make sense of it all. The next day, I texted Sheila, "We need to talk. Meet me at the house at 7 p.m. Her reply came quickly, "Fine." No apology, no remorse, just a single word that spoke volumes. At 7 p.m. sharp, she walked in, her posture defensive, her face set in a stubborn expression. "What's this about?" she asked, crossing her arms. I didn't waste time. I laid out everything I had, every receipt, every email, and finally, Rachel's recording. As the damning evidence piled up, I watched her face pale, her mask of confidence cracking. "What do you have to say for yourself, Sheila?" I asked, my voice cold but controlled. For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting between the papers and my face. Then she scoffed, shaking her head. "You're really digging, aren't you?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "So what? You've got your proof. What do you want from me?" Her words hit me like a slap. There was no apology, no attempt to explain, just pure arrogance. It was clear that she didn't regret her actions. She only regretted being caught. "What I want is simple," I said, standing tall. "I want you out of my life. Permanently." She laughed bitterly. "Fine, but don't act like this is all my fault. You're not perfect either." I shook my head, her deflection no longer surprising. "This isn't about me, Sheila. It's about you. And I hope Travis was worth it because he's all you have now." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. Instead, she grabbed her purse and stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind her. As her footsteps faded, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, anger, sadness, but most of all, determination. This wasn't the end for me. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could finally start to heal. But deep down, I knew Sheila wasn't finished with her games. There was more to come. I could feel it. The days after Sheila walked out felt like a storm had finally passed. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. But with each passing moment, the silence began to feel like peace instead of emptiness. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I could think about my life without the weight of her lies pressing down on me. I focused on rebuilding, one small step at a time. I cleared out every trace of her from the house. The photos, the little notes she used to leave, even the furniture she'd picked out. It was painful at first, but it felt like shedding an old skin, one that no longer fit. I leaned on the people who truly cared about me. Eric checked in on me every day, dragging me out for drinks and dinners when I felt like retreating into myself. My sister, Jenna, showed up with home-cooked meals and words of encouragement, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Slowly, I began to feel the cracks in my heart start to heal. One evening, as I was scrolling through job postings, thinking about making a fresh start in a new city, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel, the woman who had given me the recording of Sheila. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what she might want. "Hi, Rachel," I said cautiously. "Hi," she replied, her tone warm. "I just wanted to check in on you. I know everything's been a lot." "It has," I admitted, "but I'm doing better. Thanks again for what you did. It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," she said, "but I felt like you deserved to know. And honestly, seeing you take control of your life has been inspiring. Not everyone has the courage to stand up for themselves like you did." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I'd felt weak and powerless, but hearing her say that made me realize how far I'd come. We ended up talking for over an hour, sharing stories about our lives, our struggles, and our hopes for the future. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd found a new ally in my journey forward. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I stayed in touch. What started as casual conversations grew into something more. A connection that felt genuine, honest, and completely unexpected. She wasn't like Sheila. She was kind, grounded, and unafraid to be vulnerable. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. One sunny Saturday morning, Rachel and I met for coffee at the same shop where she'd first revealed the truth to me. As we sat there, laughing over shared memories and dreams for the future, I realized something important. Sheila's betrayal didn't define me. It was a painful chapter, but it wasn't the whole story. I had the power to write the rest of it. As Rachel smiled at me from across the table, I knew that the worst was behind me. Life had handed me a second chance. A chance to rebuild, to rediscover myself, and maybe even to find love again. And this time, I wasn't going to take any of it for granted. The sun was shining, the coffee was warm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly free. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but I was ready for whatever came next. This was my story now, and I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.